You are listening to Middle East Monitor Conversations, bringing you lively discussions with prominent voices from the region and beyond, as we delve deeper into issues shaping the Middle East and North Africa, from politics, the culture, and the arts.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another conversation with the Middle East Monitor. My name is Naseem Ahmed, and I will be your host for today's discussion. As we mark the first anniversary of Israel's military offensive in Gaza, I wanted to dedicate a show to reflect on the events of the past year with a Palestinian. And to help us do that, I'm thrilled to be joined by none other than Dr. Ramzy Baroud, a prominent voice, a leading figure in the Palestinian struggle against Israeli apartheid. Thank you, Ramzy, for joining us.
Thank you for having me, man. Appreciate it.
So, as I said, Ramzy is a journalist and the editor of Palestine Chronicle. He's the author of several books. His latest is These Chains Will Be Broken, Palestinian Stories of Struggle and Defiance in the Israeli Prisons. Baroud is a non-resident senior research fellow at the Center for Islam and Global Affairs and also the Afro-Middle East Center. Let's begin, Ramzy, if I may. I mean, you've directed, you're a direct victim of Zionism, being a descendant of Palestinian refugees, a son of a freedom fighter, no less, as you chronicle in one of your books. Your life has been dedicated to understanding the forces behind the oppression and the subjugation of the Palestinian people. You've been doing that all your life. And so I guess over the past year, have you learned anything more about Israel and Zionism that you didn't know before? Has anything in particular surprised you about the manner in which Israel has gone about enforcing its will and domination on Palestine?
Thank you very much, Naseem, for including me in your excellent show, which I follow very closely. That's a really, really good question. And I think I would be dishonest if I say yes. Israel basically in the last year confirmed everything that we thought we knew about Israel. And at times our voices were, seemed marginal or, kind of did not take the center stage simply because many people were kind of buying into the idea that Israel deserves to have a normal place among nations, not just in the Middle East, but internationally as well. Thus, the massive campaign of normalization that has been underway with Arab countries, sadly with Muslim countries, and even with countries in the global South that kind of, always stood on the side of Arabs and Muslims for various historical, cultural, political reasons. So Israel was kind of achieving a great deal on the diplomatic and political front. And this has been going on for years. In fact, it started way before the normalization with some Arab countries. When Netanyahu visited Africa for the first time, I think it was with the ECOWAS nations when he made that famous speech in 2016 saying that Israel is back in Africa, as if Israel, this kind of ancient nation that kind of traces its roots to thousands of years in Africa, and now it's this native indigenous people are now back in their rightful place. But this is the sad reality, and we have been trying to expose Israel for being the ugly apartheid, racist, genocidal regime that it has always been. The last year proved that we have been right all along. That talking about Israel as an ethnic cleansing regime, as a genocidal regime, as a country that is situated as a settler colonial state that is situated on the eradication of the natives, has not been academic discourses that are disconnected from reality. And you would say, well, why that disconnection? What happened? Like, did Israel ever change to make other countries feel like Israel is a different country and it's now time to normalize? Well, Israel kind of changed the tactics in a way. I mean, we are, for a while, we were no longer talking about the ethnic cleansing that has taken place during the Nakba 1947, 1948, up to 1949. Where 2/3 of the Palestinian population were kicked out of their homes, thousands of people massacred, gunned down, pushed into refugee camps, pushed into displacement camps in the region, into diaspora, what we call in Arabic the shatat. And they kind of like, they've been trying different tactics that would allow them to maintain, the same settler colonial agenda, but not using these kind of outright events where tens of thousands of people are being killed and millions of people are being pushed in every corner of the earth. This is what Ilan Pappé refers to as the incremental genocide. And this is what we Palestinians refer to as al-Nakba al-Mustamirra, or the continuous Nakba. So the Nakba was not really an event that took place in time under certain political and historical context, and it no longer exists. It is a continued event to the extent that's why many Israeli top officials during the current genocide in Gaza immediately started making references to the Nakba. So it turned out that this whole idea that the Israelis have no idea what the Nakba is, that this is just an invented Palestinian term that fits into some kind of a Palestinian discourse that nobody cares about. Well, here they were. They were very much familiar with the term, and they started saying things, well, it's about time for Nakba 2.0. These are so let's give them another Nakba. They were aware of the first Nakba, and they are also aware of the fact that what is happening in Gaza is what they, in their mind, feel was the unfinished job of the first Nakba. So there were no surprises there. There were no surprises either that Western imperialist, colonial, neo-colonial countries stood side by side with Israel, regardless of how far Israel went. It turned out that there is no moral threshold to colonialism and colonial countries. They would do anything it takes in order for them to keep feeding the military machine, the war machine of Israel, that is but an expression of Western colonialism in the Middle East. But honestly, the thing that surprised me, and I think it's the only thing that truly surprised me and hurt the most, not for me personally, but for all of us Palestinians, is that we thought that there is a point in which the Arab and Muslim Ummah would rise and create the kind of pressure, popular current of pressure, that would either confront their regimes to take a stance that is very strong and unified, or push them out of the way and articulate that stance themselves. To think that Arab countries that have normalized with Israel have not cut diplomatic ties with Israel, while some South American countries have. To think that Muslims are still going on with their daily lives, shopping, going to concerts and theaters and watching sports games, while there is an actual Holocaust taking place in Gaza and in Palestine and now in Lebanon. So the question is, when will this awakening happen? And I'm going to still be in this sense of shock, and many people are, until that change comes about. Because it's not just frustrating, it's almost ahistorical in a sense, because we have seen the Ummah rise over things that are far smaller than this. But why haven't they rose for Palestine? That's a big question that I don't think we Palestinians are responsible to answer.
You followed a number of deadly offensive against Palestinians in Gaza. Israel has a term for what it does in Gaza. It's called mowing the lawn. It's become a familiar phrase, basically demonstrating how Israel every few years would decimate Palestinians and destroy their livelihood, making sure they're not able to resist. And that's a phrase that's commonly used. They did that in 2008-9, 2012, 2014. And never did they have a strategic aim, it seems like. But in this case, did you think that Israel really had an aim in the sense that it wanted to find a final resolution to what it calls its Gaza problem? Because at the beginning, Israel, many analysts said, they wanted to ethnically cleanse, they wanted to genocide, or they wanted to make Gaza uninhabitable. This was like the final straw. Israel will plan a series of events that would lead to the annihilation of Palestinians from Gaza. Is that something you concluded right at the beginning, or was it something that was incremental in your observation?
I think October 7, the strategic value of what happened October 7, and I don't want to enter into the details of whether, about the specifics of what has taken place, but the idea behind it was to deprive Israel of initiative. Never in the history of the so-called Arab-Israeli conflict, later Palestinian-Israeli conflict, or however you want to term it. I don't like the word conflict. But however, we understand what's been taking place since the original ethnic cleansing of Palestinians during the Nakba and all the way until today. Israel has always decided the time and place of its wars against the Palestinians and against Arabs, defined the nature of that war, the geographic scope of the war, and when the wars end, and ultimately the outcome of the war as well. Gaza kind of changed that paradigm a bit. Israeli wars on Gaza haven't really been decisive in the sense that Israel could in fact claim any kind of victory. And the same thing that what also happened in Lebanon after Israel was pushed out by Hezbollah and other Lebanese resistance groups starting in 2000. They tried again in 2006. It seems that Israel's days of making kind of the decision regarding war and peace were, never peace, but you know what I mean, has been taken away from it. But October 7 kind of pushed that a step further. It took the very decision of when wars start away from Israel. So as a result, Netanyahu, for a whole year, with his government, with his extremist ministers and the Americans have been part of this war, this whole idea that the US and Israel are two separate entities. Enough with, this silliness is just not true. I mean, Antony Blinken was sitting there in the first meeting of the war cabinet, deciding to go to war against Gaza, and he cheered for it. He was happy for it. And they continue to support Israel until today. And they refuse any ceasefire, even though Russia, China, and many other countries have pushed for it. But all of these parties combined couldn't regain the initiative and determine the outcome of the war. So in Netanyahu's thinking, and I think the same thing that particularly the far right in Israel have been pushing for, is that why don't we turn the tables? Maybe we should go a little bit more, beyond deterrence, because this whole idea we need to reestablish deterrence. What deterrence that you will establish? No matter what Israel does to claim any kind of tactical victories, or even, I'm going to go even further and say strategic victory in Gaza. No matter what they do, they will never be able to erase what has happened on October 7 and everything that happened after that. I mean, I lived in a refugee camp in Gaza, and I remember the time that kids in the camp put a blanket. We used to use blankets to block the tanks from progressing in the camp. So you kind of put the dirt, old blankets under the tanks, and then they start spinning. And then sometimes, and one time there was a tank that actually tipped over because it was trying to spin the obstacles that the kids were putting in their way. That was during the first Intifada, 1987. And the way that the Israeli army reacted to that event, nobody was hurt, nothing happened, the tank was tipped right back, into its normal position. The number of Israeli helicopters that arrived to the scene, the number of Israeli tanks and soldiers, the terror that we have suffered in the Nusayrat refugee camp as a result of that particular event. Israel doesn't take these things lightly. And to think that the resistance have actually destroyed more than 1,500 tanks in Gaza over the last year, and then they stopped counting about a few months ago. To think that Israeli soldiers are being killed at such large numbers being sniped by the very kids who were born under siege, under occupation, under apartheid, never stepped a foot outside of Gaza. That is not the kind of deterrence that you can just reverse. So the idea then is, let's go a step further. The answer is ethnic cleansing. If we ethnically cleanse all of Gazans, well, it will be a terrible day in our history, but, the October 7th thing, but we can move on, because at least we ethnically cleanse the enemy. And remember what Herzog has said, the Israeli president, when he said there are no innocent people in Gaza. So he and this is the moderate guy. And so he's basically give them this blank check to do whatever they please to Palestinians, women, men, children, everybody. But they still couldn't do that. They still couldn't even ethnically cleanse the Palestinians of the north to the south, let alone the south to the Sinai Desert. So they turn against the West Bank. Maybe they can actually ethnically cleanse the Palestinians in the northern West Bank, specifically Jenin, Tulkarem, Tubas, these areas, somewhere else. We claim some kind of a victory. We build settlements and everything is going to be okay. The West Bank is still fighting. Now they are searching for victory in Lebanon. And I don't think they are going to get any victory neither in Lebanon nor in Gaza. So this is the kind of situation where the Israelis, they seem to have plans, but the plans keep changing. And that is not a plan. If you keep changing your plan, it really means that you don't have a plan. And I'll give you an example regarding this. The example was the Philadelphia corridor, which is the area separating Egypt from Gaza. Netanyahu made no mention of the Philadelphia corridor for months at the start of the war. The ones who were talking about this are the far-right extremists of his government. I mean, he is an extremist, but per Israeli standards. They were saying that, this war cannot be won unless we take charge over the Philadelphia corridor. And then Netanyahu eventually jumped on the bandwagon of the Philadelphia corridor. And he made the Philadelphia corridor to be the center and the core of any victory that Israel would. Everything was invested in the Philadelphia corridor. Well, now you have the Philadelphia corridor. What did you do with it? Nothing. The resistance hasn't changed. The tactics haven't changed. In fact, they are going even stronger in terms of their ability to target Israelis in their supposedly safe zones in the Philadelphia corridor and Netzarim. So all of these goals that the Israelis keep creating is, again, they are afraid of confronting the reality that the moment you stop, that the moment is that Palestinians have changed the course of history or the history of the relationship that, that governed the link between the Palestinians, the occupied, and the occupier. So all of these strategies, all these tactics, all of these new plans are just desperate attempts at giving Israel the initiative back, but they can't get it, and that's the problem.
Well, on the Philadelphia corridor, we should say that Netanyahu prioritized holding on to the Philadelphia corridor over getting the hostages back. So despite saying return of the hostages is our number one priority, that was offered to him numerous times, but he refused that. And one of the reasons is, as we said, putting Philadelphia corridor as a condition on any ceasefire deal. So when Israelis say hostages are our number one priority, I think they should look at themselves and say, no, it's not. Holding on to your occupation and subjugating the Palestinians has a far greater priority than the hostages themselves. I have a few questions on Israel's strategic defeat. We can get to that later, but I wanted to ask you about the manner in which the Israelis have been conducting the genocide over the past year. Many have, described it as this is the first live stream genocide in human history, and it's hard to argue against that because of the images that we see every single day. But despite that, Israel has not achieved its goal, as we mentioned. It has not eliminated Hamas, nor has it been able to return its hostages. And on top of that, Israel's economy is tanking. It seems that Israel has demonstrated that it's highly proficient in killing, but not making any strategic gains. But one story that hasn't been touched upon, I think it really shows the thinking and the racist mindset of Zionism. The story you covered, a less known story about the way in which Israel has been recruiting mercenaries and African asylum seekers. And in your article, you describe how this is really another example of the crisis within Israel itself, that they are failing to achieve their objectives, which is why they're first recruiting, they're forcefully recruiting Orthodox Jewish citizens, Jewish communities, but they're also recruiting asylum seekers, which is really unheard of to fight in the Israeli army. And you called upon the African Union to put an end to this abuse. Give us a bit of your insight into how Israel has been conducting the war. I mean, we know how it's been conducting generally, but this specific example, what does it say about the Israeli mindset and what is happening to Israel as a result of the manner in which it is conducting this war? This genocide, I should say.
Absolutely. I think we need to kind of try to challenge some notions here. And I think one of the notions that we need to challenge is the idea that Netanyahu is doing everything in his power in order for him to stay prime minister for a little bit longer. So he's doing, trying to appease his extremist ministers and make them happy, and because he doesn't want to go to prison. Okay, fine. Let's say that this notion was really paramount idea or of what has actually been taking or motivating Israel in the beginning of the war, and 2 months later, 3 months later. But you're reaching a point here where your losses are so extreme and unprecedented in your history of any kind of conflict with any Arab resistance or armies or anything of that nature. 12% of Israel's total, GNP, I believe. In fact, I think the Middle East Eye reported on that yesterday. Has been basically wiped out because of the war. Israel is being degraded economically in every possible way. The potential and the prospects of the Israeli economy is just is tanking for years to come. Many Israelis, some people say 1 million, others say about 400, 500,000 have left the country permanently. There's a new poll that came out that says 25% of those remaining in Israel are thinking about the possibility of leaving Israel because of the situation. And we can go on and on and on. And I can't believe that all of this, including the blind American support that is pushing the entire Middle East into a region, into a major conflict that would be unlike any other. I mean, I think the invasion of Iraq, because we have to think about the political circumstances or the geostrategic circumstances when Iraq was invaded. When they invaded Iraq, Iraq was already a weak country with a weak economy. It was under many years of sanctions. It had very few allies. Iran is a whole different ball game. Iran is an entirely different nation with the kind of alliances that can hurt American interests throughout the region in ways that the US has never experienced before. But the Americans are pushing all of this. I don't believe that all of this is just done because Mr. Smotrich and Mr. Ben Gvir wants to stay in power for a few more months. I don't believe it. There is something much bigger at work here. Maybe the Americans and the Israelis are disagreeing over some issues regarding the tactics, but the strategic agenda is one and the same. And this explains the sense of desperation that's happening in Israel. I mean, you spoke about the conditions they created to return the hostages. Well, how many Israelis have been killed in order for them to save 100 or 101 hostage that remains alive in Gaza? It just, from a mathematical point of view, it doesn't make any sense. So Israel is absolutely desperate because they have made a link, and I think they are right. I don't think Netanyahu is wrong on this one, linking or describing what's happening right now as an existential threat. And I think it is an existential threat. Not for the Jewish people, not for Zionism, for settler, colonial, racist, apartheid Zionism. this is indeed an existential threat. Because if Israel loses this, the conversation would have to change. So they are doing everything in their power to maintain control, to keep this war going another day, another month. So mercenaries being recruited on Facebook, and that option doesn't seem to be working very well. So what they are doing now, and that's the irony of all ironies, is that they are seeking the asylum seekers, the African refugees, who have been abused and humiliated and put in, according to Beit Salem and other human rights organizations, including the Israeli Beit Salem, in what looks like concentration camps in the desert, in the Naqab, in order for them to be pushed out. And indeed, they pushed out thousands, dumping them in some African country that is willing to accept them for a certain amount of money. I mean, what the African refugees have experienced in Israel is really unparalleled compared to any other refugee experience in the Middle East. And now, and that expresses two things. Number one, how low Israel is willing to go. But number two, how desperate Israel is. By going to these very people and saying, come and fight for my dirty wars in Gaza against your own brothers and sisters, by the way. We are all, whether you are African or Palestinian, we are all members of this place that we call the Global South. We all suffered under colonialism, under the oppression of foreign occupations and all of that, to fight against Palestinians in order for them to acquire some sort of a permanent residence. According to Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper, not a single one of them has been given proper papers to actually become a resident. So they are still having them go and kill and die, and they are not even getting what they have been promised, which is to remain living in that state. Now, the African Union, and I think they need to investigate this matter, and urgently so. I mean, we appreciate the strong statements. We appreciate that many African countries, indeed South Africa, Namibia, and others, have taken a solid stance in support for Palestinians and have translated their words into action. But I think the African Union, that was so ready just about a couple of years ago to normalize with Israel and to accept Israel as a member state, they need to investigate this for the respect of the African immigrants themselves, but also in solidarity with Palestinians, because our sons and daughters should not be allowed to go and kill Palestinians, and many of them come back. Like in South Africa, we know that this is happening in some countries in South Africa, where they just go and do their job of killing Palestinians and coming back and living normal lives in their own societies. There has to be accountability. This issue has to be investigated. It's a travesty, and it would be a shame on all of us if we argue that, well, Israel, when we look into at this matter in the future and say, from a historical point of view, Israel has managed to maintain or sustain its war and genocide against the Palestinians because of the use of mercenaries, especially those coming from Africa. I mean, that would be something that I don't think many of our people and African nations can live with. We need to take action and stop this.
We've spoken about Israel's strategic defeats. I mean, no one can deny that Israel has scored a number of tactical victories, if you want to call it that, whether it be weakening Hamas or what it's doing in Lebanon at the moment. But no one can argue or make the case that Israel has actually won any strategic victories. So what would you cite as the key strategic losses for Israel over the past year?
Oh my gosh, I mean, that's a whole different conversation, because there's a lot that's been going on. Number one, and I think it's extremely important, is that Israel has learned the limits of its firepower. Historically, nations like Israel, the United States is, of course, in that category, and others, always assume that you can just dump as much weapons as you can, bunker busters, smart bombs, dumb bombs, whatever. And somehow you can always gain some sort of a political outcome. So that those Palestinians are not behaving themselves, just go and kill a whole bunch of them. And, magically things happen in your favor. They've done this in Lebanon successfully in the past. They've done it during the Second Intifada when they killed thousands of Palestinians, invaded major cities, and suppressed the resistance for many years. And of course, they've done it in Gaza a lot, including 2008, 9, all these horrific wars. Israelis call it mowing the grass. This idea that, we confine them into certain geographic locations. We deny them, food or economic prosperity or access to the outside world. But, they're clever. They will always find a way to build their defenses somehow. And we go in every few years and we just mow the grass and we kind of restore deterrence. And that's going to get you elected in Israel and you are a war hero and all the good stuff. For the first time in its history, Israel has been devastatingly wrong regarding its ability to throw bombs at problems and then they would magically be, just disappear. And I think that's a very, very important thing. And this is why there's this conversations about, well, maybe the bunker busters are not gonna, maybe we don't have enough of them. Maybe we need the other ones that, that is, the 13,000-pound bomb that the Americans, kind of used to, they're used for nuclear facilities and that sort. Maybe the problem is just the size of the bomb. Maybe the problem is the amount of killing. Maybe we didn't kill enough and that sort of thing. But the more they do, the more they realize that the result is still the same. They can't do it. So that's very, very important. And that's terrifying for Israel. I think it was Moshe Feiglin, who was a very important member of the Likud party, ran for the leadership of Likud against Netanyahu at one point in the past, broke up and started his own party. But few days after October 7, he was in an Israeli, I think it was Arutz Shiva newspaper, in which he said, what worries me most is that Muslims are not afraid of us anymore. Muslims are not afraid of us anymore. And I thought that was really quite interesting. He didn't say Gazans, he didn't say Palestinians, he didn't say Arabs, he said Muslims are not afraid of us anymore, which means that from a strategic point of view, they always thought that by killing Palestinians, they are not only in Gaza, they're not only scaring off Palestinians everywhere, but also Arabs and Muslims as well. And now they just realize that they don't have the military capability of creating that kind of fear. So I think this is very fundamental. Number two, the isolation of Israel. The isolation of Israel. Israel was actually succeeding in isolating the Palestinians just on October 6, 2023. Palestinians were growing a bit isolated within their Arab environment and within the global South. And I personally remember going to several politicians in various African countries, asking them not to normalize with Israel. And the answer that I and many others would always get, well, if the Arabs are normalizing, Ramzy, you're asking us not to normalize. And it's just, and then he would say, well, I mean, think about this from a moral point. What moral point of view? It's politics we are talking about. Politicians don't make moral decisions. So as a result, it felt like we were becoming isolated. And then in September 2023, just days before October 7, Netanyahu, as you know, was standing at the United Nations General Assembly with the green map of the Middle East, in which Palestine was completely erased. And I think his words were something like, 2 million Palestinians should not have the right to veto peace with Arabs. So they're not important, they are marginal. I can't remember who's the one who said, was it Kushner or someone else? Palestinians can either put up or, shut up, put up or shut up or something to that effect.
I think Kushner, Jared Kushner,
yeah,
son-in-law
so it was
of
Kushner.
Donald Trump.
Exactly. So that's what it was like. But now look at what's happening, right? I mean, where do we even start? The support for Palestine. I mean, I have been to like 12 countries in the last year, speaking about Gaza and the genocide of Palestine. And you would be in neighborhoods in the middle of nowhere in some city in northern Italy, and you would see all these Palestinian flags everywhere. Nobody's taking them down. Palestinian graffiti, Palestinian Palestina Libra, everywhere from Spain to Italy to Greece to. So there's something that is happening. The thing that we've always been kind of driving towards and talk about it as intellectuals within our small circles about, the critical mass and the paradigm shift and all of that. It
Yeah, I
is
think
happening.
you touched upon in one of your articles that the fact that the Palestinian cause has become global is as a major strategic defeat for the Israelis. And if you add to that, what was said by the Democrat leader Chuck Schumer in the US, I think it was around November time, as early as that, or November, December, if I remember. He said that Israel as a state cannot survive if it becomes a pariah in the eyes of the international community. This is a Zionist American senator, very pro-Israel, and he's coming out and saying that Israel cannot survive as a pariah. And over the past year, Israel has become nothing but a pariah. And I think that's one of the most devastating strategic defeats for Israel. On top of what you mentioned, the fact that the Palestinian issue, if you compare it to what it was on 6th of October to what it is now, it's the number one global issue. And second of all, the reverse is the case with Israel. Israel is now the most isolated, most hated country in the world, not because it's a Jewish state, because it's a state embarking on a genocidal policy. And that's the strategic defeat, which many Israelis, unfortunately, are incapable of realizing.
I'm glad you mentioned this, Nassim, the issue of not because it's a Jewish state. This Israel's ability to conflate between the Jewish state and Jewish people and Jewish identity and Zionism, and they've succeeded. I mean, we know that they have in many, all these definitions of what is anti-Semitism and all of this that is just was taking the West by storm, to the point that when the October 7th took place, and immediately after that, the very flags that Palestinians were raising in France and Germany were confiscated by the police. It was in itself an anti-Semitic act in the views of many Western police and and governments. The margins in which we operated was so very small, and now it is so very big. And that's huge. This is not the kind of thing that you can reverse overnight. It's not about, we just need some PR savvy company that we hire, give them a few $1 million. The Hasbara department of Israel kicks in a little bit of, a few conferences in Las Vegas and Florida, and you're going to fix your problem. A genocide has taken place. A Holocaust is underway in Gaza. There is nothing you can do to reverse any of these things. And a lot of people are making the clear separation without being apologists between the Jewish people, between the Jewish, the Jewish identity and what Israel is doing. And I think one of the most important reasons of why this separation is happening is the fact that, especially in the United States and Canada, is that you actually have major anti-Zionist Jewish organization like Jewish Voice for Peace and others who are at the front lines. At the front line, we are no longer talking about conferences and academic conversations and books and articles. We're talking about people in their hundreds, in their thousands, taking over congressional buildings, shutting down bridges, shutting down cities, and in parts led by Jews and Muslims. And here in Seattle, in the city of Seattle, the core of the support comes from the Native American community. And so the demographics of the solidarity itself is changing.
So I want to ask you a question. Sorry, I wanted to ask you a question related to that. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Al Jazeera documentary recently on what Israel's genocide in Gaza over the past year, the recording, cataloging all the human rights violations. There's a scene in there, it's a heart-shattering documentary, and there's a scene in there of a Palestinian lady who is rebuking someone recording the genocide, and she's shouting at him saying, "Why are you recording this? The whole world's forgotten us. No one is thinking about us." And she's shouting, there's tears in her eyes. And that really affected me personally, her saying that, the whole world's forgotten us. No one is is bothered about our lives and the genocide that we are being subjected to. Stop recording. Don't record anything. Don't share your videos because no one cares. And I'm just wondering, you as a Palestinian, I mean, as a non-Palestinian, that really affected me. But as a Palestinian yourself, are Palestinians in your family, in your circles, who are being subjected to this genocide right now, are they aware that their story is shaking the world? You know, making people realize that Israel has crossed the red line, which, yes, America is acceptable to the US, acceptable to the arms industry, acceptable to the security industry and the financial, donors and things like this, but it's not acceptable to the average person across the world. Do they know this message? I'm just from your experience.
Right. That's actually a loaded question, because it's not simply them knowing, because I think a lot of them do know. But of course, many of them, I mean, they have no electricity, no way of knowing. And when they get internet connection once in a while for a few minutes, it's just enough for my sister to text me, don't worry, we are alive. Because I mean, they keep running from one refugee camp to the other, from one town to the other, and it seems like wherever they go, there's always a massacre next door. I mean, at one point, I really did think that it seems to be there's a disproportionate number of Barouds, my family, that have been killed in Gaza. We stopped counting at 55 or something like that. But it turned out that you speak to all these Gazans and they tell you 150, 200, and so forth and so on. So there's barely enough for them to communicate that they are still alive. So I can't imagine that they have a full grasp of the solidarity that is being built around Gaza, the changes in the language and the discourse, and the international institutions finally beginning to take some action, the ICJ, the ICC. But then I'm thinking, okay, as someone, now I'm thinking about it as a Gaza, right? I mean, it seems that really, at times, it seemed like everyone you knew is either dead or wounded or disappeared. And then from the point of view of that woman who's screaming, why are you recording? From her point of view, I am sure she's thinking, even if the whole world knows about this and raising our flags and singing our praises of how courageous we are, at the end of the day, nothing has been taken to even allow a drop of water into Gaza, or to stop the massacre. Because they are thinking, when you are undergoing this kind of genocide, and when you are at the receiving end of it, you're not thinking big picture. You're not thinking, well, this is the reversal of historical trajectory that's been going on for 76 years now. You're thinking, I need this to stop. I have 2 out of 5 children who are still alive, and I need this to stop. I have a branch of my family. In the beginning of the war, the father was killed. Then his eldest son was killed. Then the family ran away from Shati. They went to Deir al-Balah. Then they went to Khan Yunis. Then Israel bombed the Mawasi. Then one of the other children were killed. One is injured. The mother was injured in the back, that she's unable to walk and she needs to be sent outside and she can't go. And she had a daughter who was born with heart problems, that there's no medication for it whatsoever in Gaza. She needs to get out. And they keep calling me from some tent somewhere in Khan Yunis, hoping that I can get them out. In that particular context, I don't think any solidarity in the world, at least for now, will be meaningful unless it gets the mom out to a hospital, save the child, do something tangible, practical. So I don't blame that woman in any way. And I feel like even if she knew, under these circumstances, perhaps her response will still be the same.
Just one final question. I mean, putting your political analyst hat back on, there's a lot of talks about day after. How do you see that as a Palestinian refugee brought up in Gaza? What do you think about when various actors from around the world speak about the day after? What do you hope for, and what do you think realistically will happen when we speak about the day after?
Right. I hate to quote the likes of Henry Kissinger, But we all know that famous statement of his that if traditional armies don't win, they automatically lose. I think that the expectations, while the Israelis are still trying to formulate strategies, and as we discussed, keep changing the strategies, and they don't actually know exactly what they want, the Palestinians know exactly what they want. They want, number one, we want to survive in Gaza. We want our people to remain in Gaza. We don't want our people to be ethnically cleansed, and we want the genocide to stop. We want to rebuild Gaza. We want the Palestinian cause to become the most urgent global issue until Israel is held accountable for its Holocaust and genocide against the Palestinians. We want unity amongst our people in the post-Gaza war, real unity, not some sort of factional arrangements and distribution of seats at the PLO, but rather we need a Palestinian leadership that thinks of the Palestinian people themselves as a top priority. And I feel like if we defeat Israel's stratagem, whatever they are, starting with the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in Gaza, and teach Israel that there are limits to your ability to fight wars, as Netanyahu said. He said this is going to be Israel's last war, and I think he's right. Then Israel will be defeated at many fronts. So I think for us, it's very clear what are the limits of victory, and or what are the conditions of victory and the conditions of defeat.
Yeah, when Netanyahu said that, he actually probably meant that this is going to be Israel's last war, meaning Palestinians will be annihilated. No, it's probably the other way around.
Exactly.
Ramzy, it's been a pleasure having you on, and really, as always, appreciate your thoughts and insights. Thank you for giving us your time in our MEMO Weekly podcast. I hope to see you soon, and all the viewers the viewers who tuned in to watch our conversation. Thank you for tuning in as well. See you for another conversation with the Middle East Monitor soon. Bye-bye.
This was Middle East Monitor Conversations, brought to you by the Middle East Monitor in London.